The silence inside Cedar Falls Methodist Church was shattered like a stained glass window when Rex began to howl. The German Shepherd's cry wasn't just mournful, it was piercing, desperate, and raw. Pastor Thompson paused mid-eulogy. The congregation of 300 turned their heads, eyes drawn to the front where Rex sat rigid beside Officer Michael Harrison's flag-draped coffin. Old Doc Reynolds leaned toward his wife, voice low. "Well, I'll be damned if that dog ain't trying to say something." Rex's howling deepened into something primal. His front paws scraped the floor as he rose and pressed his snout against the polished mahogany of the coffin. It wasn't grief, it was urgency. Detective Sarah Mitchell sat frozen in the front pew. She'd worked beside Michael and Rex for 3 years. She'd heard the dog bark, growl, whine, but never this. Never this haunting, pleading cry. Something was wrong. Easy. "Boy," Pastor Thompson said softly, stepping closer. But Rex ignored him. His body was trembling, his eyes locked on the coffin. Michael's mother, Martha Harrison, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "He's just grieving," she whispered. They were inseparable. Sarah wasn't convinced. Rex began pawing furiously at the coffin's base. His claws scratched across the wood, filling the church with an eerie screech. Gasps rippled through the pews. People whispered, shifted. But Sarah was already rising to her feet. Should someone remove the dog? Mayor Patricia Hendricks asked, trying to keep her voice low, but it carried. "No," Sarah said firmly. "Don't. Rex has something to tell us." The room stilled. Rex was pacing now, nose pressed to the coffin as he moved along its length. Not frantic, methodical. Intentional. Doc Reynolds leaned forward. "I've treated animals for 47 years, he said. "That dog ain't mourning. He's working." The word hit Sarah like a cold wind. Working. Rex only worked when something was wrong. When someone needed help. When something needed to be found, suddenly Rex stopped. He began pawing furiously at one corner of the coffin, whining louder. His whole body was tense, locked in focus. He looked at Sarah, looked back at the coffin. Back to Sarah. His eyes pleading. Sarah stepped closer. 6 years earlier. A frigid February morning. Officer Michael Harrison pulled up to the decrepit Sinclair warehouse on a call no cop liked to take. Abandoned dog, possible neglect. Animal control was tied up, so dispatch asked if he'd mind checking in. Michael didn't hesitate. He had a soft spot for strays. Always had. Inside the cold, dark basement, chained to a rusted pipe, was a terrified German Shepherd pup. 4 months old, ribs showing through a matted coat, surrounded by old food cans and filth. The pup growled weakly, but when Michael crouched and whispered, "Hey there, buddy," the growl faded into a whimper. The tail twitched once. It took 20 minutes to coax the dog close enough to unhook the heavy chain from his raw, bleeding neck. When Michael finally lifted him into his arms, the pup melted into him, pressing his face into the officer's chest. "Well," Michael said, "you're coming home with me." They named him Rex. Martha had wrapped the dog in warm blankets and poured a bowl of milk. "You poor baby," she said, gently stroking his ears. "Look at those eyes. He's seen too much." From that moment, Rex never left Michael's side. By the time he turned 2, Rex had become a canine legend. At the Colorado Police Dog Academy, he didn't just pass, he amazed. Tracking, scent work, search and rescue, he was better than the best. He didn't just obey, he anticipated. He thought, their first real case? A 5-year-old girl named Emma Chun lost in Rocky Creek Park. Other dogs failed. Search teams gave up. Rex picked up the trail and against logic led Michael away from the obvious path toward a creek. A steep slope, and there she was, caught in a tangle of branches, cold, scared, but alive. "How did you know?" Michael whispered later, scratching behind Rex's ears. Rex just looked at him, those dark eyes full of calm, as if to say, "I listen." Now, years later, Rex was trying to speak again and no one could understand him. Sarah walked up the steps to the coffin. She laid a hand on Rex's back. He didn't flinch. He kept pawing, whining, pressing his nose to the same corner. Sarah's gut twisted. "Open the coffin," she said. Pastor Thompson blinked. "Detective, we open it now." The funeral director hesitated, but the look in Sarah's eyes said this isn't a request. As the lid creaked open, gasps echoed through the church. What they saw inside would change everything. Rex had been right all along. When backup arrived and the situation was resolved, Michael knelt down and wrapped his arms around his partner. "You saved my life, boy. How do you always know?" Rex just pressed his head against Michael's chest, his way of saying what words couldn't express, that their bond went beyond training, beyond beyond anything that could be taught or explained. They were partners in the truest sense. Each protecting the other, each trusting the other completely. Martha Harrison watched their relationship with a mixture of pride and amazement. It's like they share the same soul. She often told her friends, "At church, that dog would do anything for my Michael, and Michael treats that dog like family." She was right. Rex wasn't just Michael's partner. He was his best friend, his confidant, his early warning system for danger. And Michael wasn't just Rex's handler. He was the man who had saved him from certain death, given him purpose, and loved him unconditionally. Their bond was forged in rescue and strengthened by countless shared experiences of danger, triumph, and quiet moments of understanding. Rex had learned to read Michael's moods, anticipate his needs, and protect him from threats both obvious and hidden. In return, Michael had given Rex not just a home, but a reason for being. That's why, as Rex continued his desperate attempt to communicate with the mourners at Michael's funeral, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't grief. This was Rex trying to complete one final mission for the man who had saved his life all those years ago. Sarah Mitchell stood up from her pew, her black dress rustling in the sudden silence that had fallen over Cedar Falls Methodist Church. Every eye in the sanctuary was on her as she took a step toward the altar, where Rex continued his frantic pawing at Michael's coffin. The weight of 300 stairs felt heavier than her detective's badge had ever felt. "Detective Mitchell, Pastor Thompson said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years leading this congregation. "Perhaps we should continue with these advice. Rex is clearly distressed." But no. Sarah's voice cut through the sacred air like a blade. "I'm sorry, Pastor, but something's wrong here. Rex doesn't act like this ever." A murmur of discomfort rippled through the crowd. Margaret Foster, the church secretary who'd organized more funerals than anyone could count, shook her head approvingly. "This is highly irregular, Detective. We have protocols, procedures that honor the deceased with dignity and respect. Ma'am." "With all due respect," Sarah replied, her detective training taking over. "Rex has found missing children, detected explosives, and saved Michael's life more times than I can count. When he acts like this, people listen." Rex's behavior was escalating beyond anything Sarah had witnessed in their years of partnership. The German Shepherd was now alternating between scratching at Coffin's corner and looking directly at her, his dark eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her skin crawl. His whining had taken on an almost conversational quality, as if he were trying to speak words he didn't possess. Martha Harrison rose slowly from the front pew, her age-spotted hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles showed white. "Detective Mitchell, I appreciate your dedication to my son's partner, but this is Michael's funeral. People have driven hours to pay their respects. We can't just." "Mrs. Harrison," Sarah interrupted gently. "What if Rex is trying to tell us something about Michael? What if there's something we don't know? The suggestion hung in fear like incense, heavy and impossible to ignore. Martha's face crumpled with fresh grief. What could there possibly be? My son is dead, detective. Shot down by some drug dealer who didn't want to go to jail. There's nothing left to discover. But even as Martha spoke, doubt crept into her voice. She'd raised Michael Harrison, knew him better than anyone in Fit Church, and she'd always said her boy was full of surprises. Even as an adult, Michael would show up at her door with unexpected gifts. A stray cat he'd found, groceries for an elderly neighbor, stories about small kindnesses he'd performed without wanting credit. Rex suddenly stopped his frantic activity and sat perfectly still. His gaze locked on Sarah. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then unbearable. The dog's posture was rigid with attention, like a soldier awaiting orders, but his eyes held something that looked disturbingly like desperation. "Seen that look before," said a growly voice from the middle of the congregation. Retired Fire Chief Bob Garrison, 73 years old and respected by everyone in town, stood up slowly. "Seen it in rescue dogs when they found. Eaten since she was taken from her mother. Sarah Somione trapped under rubble but can't get humans to understand where to dig." "This is ridiculous," snapped Mayor Patricia Riss, her political instincts recoiling from the growing chaos. "We're disrupting a sacred ceremony based on the behavior of a grieving animal. Detective Mitchell, I strongly suggest you remove the dog so we can proceed with dignity." "The hell we will," growled Doc Reynolds, his weathered face flushed with indignation. "That dog's trying to save a life sure as I'm sitting here. I've delivered enough babies and put down enough old horses to know the difference between grief and emergency." The congregation began to split into factions. Younger members, particularly those who'd grown up hearing stories about Rex's legendary intuition, started murmuring support for Sarah's position. Older members, steeped in funeral traditions and proper decorum, sided with the mayor and church. "Leadership. This is unseemly," declared Ethel Whitmore, the self-appointed guardian of community standards. "Poor Michael deserves better than this circus." "Poor Michael trusted that dog with his life," shot back Jake Morrison, a young police officer who trained under Michael. "If Rex says something's wrong, then something's wrong." Pastor Thompson raised his hands for calm, but the argument was gaining momentum. Voice rose and fell like competing sermons, each side certain of their moral high ground. Sarah felt the weight of the decision crushing down on her shoulders. The wrong choice, and she'd be remembered as the detective who desecrated a hero's funeral. But if she ignored Rex and something terrible happened, Rex made the decision for her. The German Shepherd suddenly launched himself at the coffin, his powerful body slamming against the polished mahogany with a sound that echoed through the church. Like a gunshot, his claws scrabbled desperately at the seam where the lid met the base, and his whining escalated to a keening wail that raised hair on every neck in the sanctuary. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," whispered Mrs. Kowalski from the back row, crossing herself reflexively. "That's it," Sarah declared, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "We're opening the coffin now." The silence that followed was deafening. Martha Harrison stared at Sarah with a mixture of horror and something that might have been hope. Pastor Thompson's face went pale as communion wine. The entire congregation seemed to hold its breath. "Detective Mitchell," Thepester said carefully, "I cannot authorize such an action. The family would need to consent. The funeral director would need to be present. There are legal considerations. There's a life at stake." Sarah interrupted, though she couldn't explain how she knew that with such certainty. "Rex is trying to savvy Simeon. I can feel it." Martha Harrison stood silent for a long moment, her eyes moving from Sarah to Rex to the coffin containing her only child. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly throughout. "The hushed sanctuary. If there's even a chance," she began, then stopped, gathering her courage. "If there's any possibility that my Michael was trying to save someone, then we have to know. We have to unearth it." She looked directly at Pastor Thompson, her grief-stricken face set with determination. "Open it, open my son's coffin." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the congregation. Some people stood to leave in protest. Others pressed forward, unable to resist the terrible curiosity of what they might find. Rex sensed the shift in the room's energy and redoubled his efforts, his claws now leaving actual scratches in the coffin's finish. Sarah nodded to Jake Morrison and Officer Derek Chun, who had moved closer to the altar. "Help me with this," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. As they approached the coffin, Rex backed away just enough to give them room to work, but his eyes never left the spot where he'd been scratching. His entire body trembled, with anticipation, with urgency, with something that looked remarkably like hope. The latches clicked open with sounds that seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Sarah's hand shook as she prepared to lift the lid, knowing that whatever they found inside would change everything, for better or for worse. Time seemed suspended as the detective took a deep breath and prepared to discover what had driven Rex to such desperate measures. What secret Michael Harrison had carried to his grave, and what life might hang in the balance of their decision. To trust a dog's unshakable conviction that something precious needed to be saved. The coffin lid lifted with a soft whoosh, like a held breath finally released. Sarah's hands trembled as she and the two officers carefully raised the heavy mahogany top, revealing Michael Harrison's peaceful form draped in his dress blue uniform. The American flag had been folded with military precision and placed beside him, and his badge gleamed on his chest in the afternoon light, filtering through the church's stained glass windows. For a moment, nothing seemed amiss. Michael looked exactly as he should, dignified, serene, hands folded over his chest in eternal rest. A collective sigh of confusion rippled through the congregation. Mayor Ricks began to clear her throat, preparing what would undoubtedly be a sharp rebuke about disturbing the dead based on animal hysteria. But Rex wasn't finished. The German Shepherd approached the open coffin with a reverence that silenced every critic in the sanctuary. His movements were careful, purposeful, as he sniffed along the edge of Michael's uniform jacket. His tail wasn't wagging. This wasn't playful behavior. This was the focused intensity of a working dog who had found exactly what he was looking for. Then Sarah saw it. A slight bulge in Michael's jacket pocket that hadn't been visible when the coffin was closed. Something was tucked inside the inner breast pocket of his dress uniform. Something that created just enough of an outline to catch the trained eye of Simeon, who knew what to look for. "There," she whispered, pointing to feebly perceptible irregularity. Rex found something. Pastor Thompson leaned closer, his skepticism wearing with growing curiosity. "I don't see anything unusual, Detective. Perhaps this disruption has gone far enough." Rex's sharp bark cut off Thepister's words. The dog was staring directly at Michael's jacket pocket, his ears pinned forward in the alert position that every canine officer in the county recognized a Starjet acquired. Sarah's heart pounded as she reached toward Michael's uniform. Her detective instinct screamed that this violated every protocol about crime scenes and evidence preservation. But her gut told her that whatever Rex had detected, it was a matter of life and death. Her fingers found the pocket sepning and felt something unexpected, not the hard edge of papers or personnel effects, but something soft and warm. "Sweet Lord in heaven," she breathed, her face going pale as her hand made contact with the mysterious object. The warmth wasn't residual body heat. It was something alive. With infinite care, Sarah's fingers explored the pocket's contents. Her trained hands, accustomed to handling evidence and searching suspects, encountered something that made no sense in the context of a funeral. Soft fabric, tiny limbs, the faintest whisper of movement. "What is it?" Martha Harrison's voice cracked with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Sarah's answer came not in words, but in action. She carefully extracted a small bundle from Michael's jacket pocket, a tiny golden retriever puppy, no more than 3 weeks old, wrapped in what appeared to be one of Michael's old police t-shirts. The puppy was unconscious, but breathing, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow, rapid breaths. A collective gasp from the congregation was audible 3 blocks away. "Oh my God," whispered Doc Reynolds, his 72 years of veterinary experience kicking in instantly. "That little one's hypothermic and dehydrated, been without proper care for days by the look of it." The puppy was barely the size of Sarah's 2 hands cubed together, its golden fur matted and dull. Its eyes were still closed in the way of very young animals, and its tiny pink tongue protrudes lightly from its mouth. Most alarming of all, its breathing was labored and irregular. Rex wed softly and moved closer to Sarah, his massive head hovering protectively over the tiny form. Hi's earlier frantic energy had transformed into something gentler but no less intense. The focused attention of a guardian who had successfully completed his mission. "How is this possible?" Pastor Thompson stammered, his theological certainty shaken by the impossible scene before him. How could a living creature survive inside a sealed coffin for 3 days? Martha Harrison stepped forward, her grief-stricken face now illuminated by something that looked like wonder. "Michael," she whispered, reaching out to touch the puppy's tiny head. "What did you do, son?" Doc Reynolds had already moved into action, his arthritis forgotten as he gently took the puppy from Sarah's hands. His experienced fingers checked for vital signs, felt for hydration levels, assessed the tiny creature's condition with the skill of nearly 5 decades of veterinary practice. "This little one's been protected from the worst of it," he announced, his voice tight with professional concern. "Wrapped up warm, kept close to, well, kept insulated somehow. But she's in serious trouble. Severe dehydration, hypothermia. Probably hasn't asked, her detective mind already working to piece together the puzzle. Female, maybe 3 weeks old, golden retriever by the look of her coat. Too young to be away from her mother, too young to regulate her own body temperature." Doc Reynolds's weathered face was grim. "She's got maybe an hour, 2 at most, before organ failure sets in." The congregation buzzed with shocked whispers and confused murmurs as some people were weeping openly, overwhelmed by the emotional whiplash of the moment. Others stood frozen in disbelief, struggling to process what they'd witnessed. A few had pulled out cell phones capturing images that would soon spread across social media with hashtags like #miracle in Cedar Falls and #rose to the end. "I don't understand," said Margaret Foster, the church secretary who prided herself on maintaining order in all things. "Where did this animal come from? How did it get inside Officer Harrison's coffin?" Sarah was already working through the timeline in her detective mind. Michael had been killed 3 days ago during a routine traffic stop that went wrong. The suspect, a known drug dealer named Tommy Vance, had opened fire when Michael approached his vehicle. Michael had returned fire, wounding Vance before succumbing to his injuries. The case seemed straightforward, a tragic but clear-cut line of duty-death, but now everything was different. The presence of the puppy suggested that Michael's final moments weren't what anyone had assumed. He hadn't just been killed in the line of duty. He'd been protecting something precious, something innocent, something worth dying for. Rex's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. The German Shepherd had spent 3 days knowing that a life hung in the balance that his partner's final act of heroism was incomplete. Unable to communicate in words, he'd done the only thing he could. He'd refused to give up, refused to let the funeral proceed, refused to let Fepuppy die unknown and unmourned. "We need to get her to the veterinary clinic immediately," Doc Reynolds announced, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to life and death decisions. "I've got 4 fluids, warming equipment, everything she needs, but we're working against the clock here." As if summoned by the urgency in his voice, the puppy stirred slightly in the old veterinarian's hands, her tiny mouth opened in a soundless mew, and one impossibly small paw flexed against the fabric of Michael's t-shirt. The congregation held its collective breath. In that moment, the sanctuary felt less like a place of mourning and more like a place of miracles. The stained glass windows seemed to glow brighter, casting rainbow patterns across the scene of the most unusual funeral in Cedar Falls history. Martha Harrison stepped closer to Doc Reynolds, her eyes fixed on the tiny creature that had somehow been connected to her son's final moments. "What do you need from us, Doctor? How can we help save her?" "Prayer wouldn't hurt," the old veterinarian replied with a slight smile. "And maybe someone to assist me at the clinic. This little one's going to need round-the-clock care for the next several days." Sarah looked down at Rex, who was watching the puppy with the intense focus of a protector who understood that his vigil was far from over. The German Shepherd's eyes met hers, and in that moment she understood exactly what Michael's final mission had been, and what Rex's new mission would be. Present, Doc Reynolds Veterinary Clinic. 3:47 p.m. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed steadily in Doc Reynolds' treatment room as he worked with the methodical precision of a surgeon. The tiny golden retriever puppy lay motionless on a heated pad, her breathing so shallow it was barely visible, and 4-line, impossibly small, delivered life-saving fluids into her dehydrated system, while a heart monitor beeped with irregular, concerning rhythms. "Come on, little one," Doc whispered, his weathered hands adjusting the warming lamp above her. "Tiny form, your daddy didn't save you just so you could give up now." Rex had positioned himself as close to the examination table as Sarah would allow, his dark eyes never leaving the puppy. The German Shepherd's vigil was absolute. He hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk water, hadn't even acknowledged the treats that well-meaning congregation members had offered. His entire being was focused on the fragile life that Michael had deed protecting. Sarah paced the small clinic waiting room, her cell phone pressed to her ear as she spoke with the Colorado State Police investigation unit. "No, I need you to reopen the Harrison case immediately. We found evidence that completely changes the timeline." "Yes," I said, "evidence. Living evidence." Through the treatment room's glass window, she could see Doc Reynolds working with the desperate efficiency of a man racing against time. The puppy's body temperature was dangerously low, her blood sugar critically depleted. Every minute that passed without improvement decreased her chances of survival. 3 days earlier, Rural Highway 2 of 85-6:23 p.m. Michael Harrison's patrol car crested the hill overlooking Miller's Creek Bridge. Just as the sun began its descent behind the Colorado mountains, he'd been responding to a report of an abandoned vehicle when he spotted something that made him pull over immediately. A cardboard box sitting alone on the roadside, moving slightly in the evening breeze. His training told him to be cautious. Abandoned packages could contain anything from drugs to explosives. But his instincts, honed by 6 years of partnership with Rex, told him something different. This wasn't a threat. This was something that needed help. Michael approached the box slowly, his hand resting on his service weapon out of habit rather than genuine concern. What found inside broke his heart and changed everything about what would become his final patrol. A mother golden retriever lay dead inside the box, her body still warm, but her life already gone. Curled against her belly was a tiny puppy, maybe 3 weeks old, mewing pitifully and trying to nurse from a mother who could no longer provide comfort. Someone had dumped them both, leaving them to die alone by the roadside. "Oh, hell," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his years on the force, but animal abandonment always hit him hardest. Maybe it was because Rex had been abandoned once. Or maybe it was just the fundamental injustice of harming creatures who couldn't defend themselves. The puppy was golden-colored with white markings on her chest and paws, impossibly small and utterly helpless. When Michael gently lifted her from the box, she fit easily in one of his large hands, her tiny body trembling with cold and hunger. "Don't worry, little girl," he murmured, tucking her inside his jacket against his chest. "I've got you now. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." He should have called animal control. Protocol dictated that abandoned animals be turned over to THEPRPR authorities. But Cedar Falls Animal Shelter was overcrowded and underfunded, and a 3-week-old puppy without her mother would likely be euthanized within hours. Michael couldn't bear that thought. Instead, he radioed his position and headed toward town, planning to take the puppy to Doc Reynolds. The old veterinarian had a soft spot for rescue cases and would know exactly how to care for such a young animal. Michael Evans started thinking about names. Hope seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Present Doc Reynolds Clinic, 4:15 p.m. Her core temperature is coming up slowly, Doc announced to the small crowd that had gathered in his waiting room, but she's still critical. The next few hours will tell us everything. Martha Harrison sat in a plastic chair, her funeral dress wrinkled and her eyes red from crying. She clutched a tissue in one hand and Rex's leash in the other, though the German Shepherd showed no interest in leaving his post by the treatment room window. "Doctor," she said quietly, "do you really think Michael was trying to save her when he died?" Doc Reynolds looked up from his monitors and met her eyes through the glass. "Mrs. Harrison, I've known your son since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. That boy never met a stray he couldn't love. If he had this little one with him when that dealer started shooting, he'd have protected her with his life." The weight of that statement settled over the room like a blanket. Michael hadn't just died in the line of duty. He died as a protector, guardian, a man who valued innocent life above his own safety. 3 days earlier, Highway 285, 6:45 p.m., Michael was only 2 miles from town when he spotted the speeding sedan in his rearview mirror. The car was weaving erratically, clearly exceeding the speed limit by at least 20 miles per hour. With the puppy nestled safely inside his jacket, Michael activated his emergency lights and began pursuit. The sedan belonged to Tommy Vance, a small-time drug dealer with a history of assault charges and a warrant for his arrest on trafficking charges. When Michael's patrol car appeared behind him, Vance panicked. He'd been high on methamphetamine for 18 hours straight and was carrying enough cocaine to guarantee a lengthy prison sentence. What should have been a routine traffic stop became a deadly confrontation when Vance decided he'd rather kill a cop than go back to jail. Michael had just stepped out of his patrol car, one hand protecting the puppy inside his jacket when Vance opened fire through his rear window. The first bullet caught Michael in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him to the ground behind his vehicle. Even as he fell, Michael's only thought was protecting the tiny life pressed against his chest. He managed to unzip his jacket and wrap the puppy more securely in his police t-shirt, creating a warm, safe cocoon that might give her a chance to survive. Whatever happened next, the gunfight lasted less than 30 seconds. Michael, wounded and weakened, managed to return fire and wound Vance before a second bullet found its mark. As his vision blurred and his strength faded, Michael used his last conscious moments to secure the puppy inside his dress jacket, the one he'd worn to court that morning and forgotten to change out of present. Doc Reynolds' clinic. 4:43 p.m. The puppy's eyes fluttered open for the first time since her rescue. They were brown, the color of chocolate, and they seemed to focus immediately on Rex's massive face pressed against the glass partition. "Well, I'll be damned," Doc breathed, his voice filled with wonder. "Look at that. She's looking right at Rex. Like she knows he's the one who saved her." Rex made a soft whining sound, the first vocalization he'd made since the church. His tail gave a tentative wag as the puppy's tiny mouth opened in a soundless mew. Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the interaction between the massive German Shepherd and the fragile puppy. "She's going to Mackite, isn't she, Doc?" "Too early to tell for certain," the veterinarian replied, but his voice carried more hope than it had an hour ago. "But she's a fighter just like her daddy was, and she's got Rex watching over her now." Through the window, they could see the puppy trying to lift her head, her brown eyes tracking Rex's movements as he paced slowly along the glass. It was as if she understood that this large protective presence was connected to the warmth and safety she'd known during her darkest hours. Martha Harrison stood up slowly, her arthritis protesting after hours off sitting in the uncomfortable clinic chair. "Doctor, when she's well enough, when she's ready for a home." "Yes, ma'am, I'd like to take her." "Both of them, Rex and the puppy. They belong together now, don't they?" Doc Reynolds smiled for the first time that day. "Mrs. Harrison, you think?" That's exactly what Michael would have wanted. Outside the clinic, word of miracle at Cedar Falls Methodist Church was spreading faster than wildfire. Social media posts tagged Ashka Rex New and Michael's Last Mission were going viral, shared by thousands of people who couldn't believe the incredible story of a dog's unwavering devotion and a hero's final act of love. But inside the small treatment room, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the steady beeping of monitors, the gentle hum of warming equipment, and the sight of a tiny golden puppy opening her eyes to look upon the German Shepherd, who had refused to let her die, forgotten and alone. The heart monitor's steady beeping transformed into an irregular staccato that made Doc Reynolds' blood run cold. At 5:23 p.m., exactly 36 minutes after the puppy had first opened her eyes, her vital signs began crashing with terrifying speed. The tiny golden retriever's body temperature plummeted despite the warming lights. Her breathing became labored and erratic, and her heart rate spiked. Dangaroos labor beginning to fade. No, Doc muttered, his arthritic hands moving with desperate efficiency as alarms began sounding throughout the small clinic. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't you dare give up on us now." Rex pressed himself against the glass partition, his massive body trembling as he sensed the crisis unfolding. The German Shepherd's whining escalated to a keening wail that seemed to echo the electronic warnings filling the treatment room. His claws scraped against the linoleum floor as he paced frantically, unable to reach the tiny creature he'd sworn to protect. Sarah burst through the door from the waiting room, her detective instincts recognizing the sound of emergency. "What's happening?" She was getting better. "Her system's shutting down," Doc replied grimly, checking the 4-line and adjusting medication dosages with hands that hadn't shaken like this in decades. Sometimes happens with severe trauma cases. The body holds on just long enough to feel safe. Then lets go. She's been through too much. Martha Harrison appeared in the doorway, her face ashen as she took in the scene. The monitors that had been beeping reassuringly just minutes before now screamed warnings, and electronic voices that spoke of failing organs and fading life. Her son's final act of heroism was slipping away before their eyes, and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it. "Can't you give her something?" Sarah pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. There has to be something we can do. Doc Reynolds shook his head slowly, his 72 years of veterinary experience telling him what his heart refused to accept. I've done everything medically possible. 4 fluids, warming protocols, glucose supplements, cardiac stimulants, but she's just too small, been without proper care for too long. Her body doesn't have the reserves to fight anymore. The puppy's breathing became increasingly shallow. Each tiny gasp a struggle against the inevitable. Her brown eyes, which had been so bright and alert just an hour before, were growing dim. The fight was leaving her small body one labored breath at a time. Rex's anguish was palpable. The German Shepherd threw his head back and released a howl that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, a sound of grief and loss that spoke of bonds being severed and promises being broken. His scurries echoed through the clinic with such raw emotion that everyone present felt their hearts breaking along with his. "She's not going to make it, is she?" Martha whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the monitors register increasingly dire numbers. Doc Reynolds couldn't bring himself to answer directly. Instead, he gently stroked the puppy's tiny head with one weathered finger, his touch infinitely gentle, despite the magnitude of his failure. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm so very sorry." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah felt her knees go weak as the full weight of what was happening crashed over her. They'd come so close to Emmerich, had experienced the joy of discovery and rescue, only to watch helplessly as death claimed its prize anyway. Michael's sacrifice would be for nothing. His final act of love would end in tragedy. Rex seemed to understand that the end was near. His frantic pacing stopped abruptly, and he sat down facing the treatment room window with the disciplined posture of a soldier standing guard. His dark eyes fixed on the puppy's still form, and his breathing synchronized with hers, as if he could somehow share his strength, give her his life force through sheer force of will. The heart monitor's beeping grew slower, more irregular. Each pause between beats stretched longer than the last, marking time toward an inevitable silence. Theppapi's tiny chest barely rose and fell now, her breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. "Maybe," Martha began, then stopped, her voice hoking on unspoken hope. "What is it, Mrs. Harrison?" Sarah asked, grasping at any possibility, no matter how remote. "Maybe we could let Rex in here with her," Martha suggested, her words tumbling out in a rush. "They've been connected somehow from the moment she was found. What if being close to him might help?" Doc Reynolds frowned, his medical training wearing with his understanding of the mysterious bonds between animals. "It's highly irregular. We maintain sterile conditions for a reason, and Rex hasn't been treated for." "Doctor," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd spent years making life and death decisions. "What do we have to lose at this point?" The question silenced everyone in the room. The monitors continued their electronic chorus of decline, marking the puppy's slide toward death with mechanical precision. Traditional medicine had reached its limits. Perhaps it was time to trust in something that couldn't be measured or quantified. The bond between creatures who'd shared the darkest moments and somehow found each other in the light. Rex seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. He stood and approached the treatment room door, his movements calm and purposeful. Gone was the frantic desperation of earlier. Now he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a guardian preparing for his final duty. "All right," Doc Reynolds said. Finally, his voice heavy with resignation and perhaps a touch of desperate hope. "But we do this carefully. Rex stays calm, no sudden movements, and if I say he needs to leave, he leaves immediately." Sarah nodded and opened the treatment room door. Rex entered with the reverence of someone stepping into a cathedral, his massive frame moving with careful deliberation. He approached the examination table slowly, his nose twitching as he took in the puppy's scent, fainter now, fading like everything else about her. The German Shepherd positioned himself beside the table, his large head level with the puppy's tiny form. For a moment, he simply watched her struggle to breathe, his dark eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that seemed almost human. Then, with infinite gentleness, he lowered his head until his nose barely touched her golden fur. The effect was immediate and inexplicable. The puppy's breathing, which had been growing weaker by the minute, seemed to steady slightly. Her tiny body, which had been growing cold despite the warming lights, appeared to draw warmth from Rex's proximity. Most remarkably, the erratic beeping of the heart monitor began to find a more regular rhythm. What the hell? Doc Reynolds breathed, his eyes fixed on the monitors in disbelief. Rex began to make a sound none of them had heard before. A low, rumbling vibration that seemed to emanate from deep within his chest. It wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a purr, but something altogether unique. The sound filled the small treatment room with a frequency that seemed to resonate with life itself. Is hesing to her? Martha asked in wonder, her tears momentarily forgotten as she witnessed something that defied medical explanation. Sarah found herself holding her breath as she watched the impossible scene unfold. The massive German Shepherd, who'd spent 3 days trying to save a life he couldn't even see, was now using his presence, his warmth, his very essence to pull a dying puppy back from the brink of death. The monitor showed changes that Doc Reynolds' medical training couldn't explain, but his heart readily accepted. Heart rate stabilizing, body temperature rising, breathing becoming deeper and more regular. Somehow, Rex's proximity was giving the puppy what all the medical equipment and medications couldn't, the will to live. "Come on, little one," Rex seemed to whisper through his gentle vibrations. "Your daddy didn't save you just so you could leave us now. Stay with us. Stay with me." The puppy's eyes fluttered open once more, and this time they focused clearly on Rex's face, hovering protectively above her. Her tiny mouth opened in what might have been a yawn or might have been an attempt to respond to his song. Either way, it was the first voluntary movement she'd made since the crisis began. The room held its collective breath as life and death balanced on the edge of a moment that would determine whether Michael Harrison's final sacrifice would end in triumph or tragedy. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. As Rex continued his gentle rumbling song, the puppy's vital signs strengthened with each passing minute. Her heart rate found a steady, strong rhythm that made the monitors beep with reassuring regularity. Her breathing deepened. No longer the shallow gasps of a creature fighting for life, but the peaceful respirations of Simeon finally safe. "I have never seen anything like this in 47 years of practice," Doc Reynolds whispered, his voice filled with awe as he watched the numbers on his equipment improve beyond anything medical science could explain. Her temperatures rising, blood pressure stabilizing, oxygen levels improving. "Doc, it's like she's drawing strength directly from Rex." But even as hope bloomed in the small treatment room, Sarah's detective instincts were working to piece together the fuller picture of what had happened 3 days ago. Something about the timeline didn't add up, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they still didn't know the complete truth about Michael's final moments. "Doc," she said quietly, pulling out her notebook, "when you examined the puppy initially, did you notice anything unusual about her condition? Anything that might tell us more about what happened?" Doc Reynolds carefully checked the puppy's improving vital signs before answering. "Well, now that you mention it, there was something. She was dehydrated and hypothermic, yes, but not as severely as I would have expected after 3 days. And there were traces of what looked like hand feeding around her mouth. Someone had been trying to give her water or milk." Martha Harrison looked up sharply. "Hand feeding? You mean Michael was taking care of her while he was still alive?" "That's what evidence suggests," Doc replied. "This little one didn't just survive by accident. Someone was actively caring for her, keeping her warm, probably trying to feed her with whatever was available. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place in her mind. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed the Colorado State Police Evidence Unit. "This is Detective Mitchell. I need you to re-examine Officer Harrison's patrol car, specifically looking for any signs that he was caring for an animal. Check for bottles, cloths, anything that might have been used for feeding or warming a puppy." While Sarah made her calls, Rex maintained his vigil beside the examination table. The puppy had turned her tiny head toward him, and her brown eyes remained fixed on his face with an intensity that spoke of deep recognition. It was as if she understood that this massive protective presence was the reason she was still alive. Martha approached the table slowly, her weathered hand reaching out to gently stroke the puppy's golden fur. "Michael always said that Rex could sense things other people couldn't," she murmured. "I never imagined it went this far." The puppy responded to Martha's touch with a soft mewing sound, the first vocalization she'd made since being discovered. It was weak but clear, a tiny voice announcing to Thule that she was still fighting, still present, still very much alive. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from the evidence team. She read it quickly, her eyes widening with each line. "They found it," she announced to the room. "In Michael's patrol car, an empty baby bottle, wet towels, and Asmal heating pad plugged into the car's power outlet." He turned his patrol car into a makeshift puppy nursery. The revelation hit everyone like a physical blow. Michael hadn't just found the puppy and hidden her away. He'd been actively caring for her, doing everything in his power to keep her alive while he figured out a permanent solution. His final patrol hadn't been routine police work. It had been a rescue mission that he'd taken on willingly, knowing the risks. "He was heading to my clinic when the shooting happened," Doc Reynolds said suddenly, his voice filled with certainty. "That's why he was on Highway 285 instead of his usual patrol route. He was bringing her to me." Martha began to cry again. But these were different tears. Not the bitter grief of loss, but the bittersweet joy of understanding her son's final act. Of compassion. "He couldn't just leave her to die," she whispered. "That's not who Michael was. He never could walk away from something that needed help." Sarah's phone rang again, this time with a call from Sergeant Patricia Myers at the State Police Headquarters. The conversation was brief but illuminating, and when Sarah hung up, her face was grim with new understanding. "The suspect, Tommy Vance, is talking," she announced. "He's trying to cut a deal, and part of his statement includes details about the shooting that weren't in the initial report." "What kind of details?" Martha asked, though her voice suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know. According to Vance, Michael didn't return fire immediately when the shooting started. The suspect says Michael fell behind his patrol car and seemed to be protecting something inside his jacket. Vance thought it was body armor or a weapon, but now we know it was her. Doc Reynolds finished, looking down at the puppy who was growing stronger by the minute under Rex's protective watch. The full picture of Michael's heroism was becoming clear. When the gunfight started, his first instinct hadn't been to draw his weapon or call for backup. It had been to protect the tiny life he'd been caring for. Even as bullets flew around him, even as his own life hung in the balance, Michael's priority had been ensuring that the puppy would survive. Rex seemed to sense the emotional weight of these revelations. He nuzzled the puppy gently, his massive head providing a protective canopy over her small form. The bond between them was strengthening visibly. The guardian and the protected, the savior and the saved, connected by the love of a man who'd given his life for both of them. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly, looking at another message on her phone. The evidence team found a handwritten note in Michael's patrol car. It waist-tucked under the driver's seat. She held up her phone, displaying a photo of Michael's familiar handwriting on a piece of paper that looked like it had been torn from his citation book. Martha moved closer to read her son's final written words. Found her on Highway 285. Mother dog weighs already gone. She's maybe 3 weeks old. Golden. Retriever mix. Taking her to Doc Reynolds. If something happens to me, please make sure she gets a good home. She deserves a chance. Mepshi. The note was dated 3 days earlier on timestamp just 30 minutes before the shooting. Michael had known he was taking a risk by deviating from his patrol. Wrote. Had known that carrying the puppy might compromise his ability to respond to threats, but he'd made the choice anyway because saving an innocent life mattered more to him than protocol or personal safety. Martha's hand shook as she reached out to touch the phone screen, as if she could somehow reach through the digital image to touch her son's words one last time. He knew, she whispered. Somehow he knew he might not make it, and he wanted to make sure she'd be taken care of. The puppy, as if responding to the emotional intensity in the room, made another soft sound and tried to lift her head. Rex immediately lowered his nose to Meether, and for a moment they touched. The massive German Shepherd and the tiny Golden Retriever, connected by tragedy and hope, by loss and love, by the final wishes of a man who'd valued life above all else. Doc Reynolds checked his monitors one more time and smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn since the crisis began. Her vitals are stable now, he announced. Heart rate normal, temperature rising steadily, breathing clear and strong. She's going to Makite. The words filled the small treatment room with a joy so profound it felt almost holy. Michael's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. His final act of love would live on in the tiny creature he died protecting and in the bond between her and the dog who'd refused to let her history end in tragedy. Rex lifted his head and looked directly at Martha, his dark eyes seeming to communicate something that needed no words. I've got her now. She'll never be alone again. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood that this wasn't just the end of a crisis. It was the beginning of something beautiful, something that will honor Michael's memory in ways that no monument or ceremony ever could. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Martha Harrison's kitchen window, casting gentle patterns across the hardwood floor where two very different dogs shared their breakfast. Rex, now officially retired from police service, ate with the methodical precision of a career professional, while beside him, a healthy golden retriever puppy named Hope attacked her kibble with the unbridled enthusiasm that only a 6-month-old could muster. Slow down there, little girl. Martha chuckled, refilling Hope's water bowl. That food ain't going anywhere. Hope paused in her eating just long enough to wag her entire body at Martha, her tail creating a small golden whirlwind. Before she returned to the serious business of breakfast, Rex watched her with the patient tolerance of an older sibling, occasionally nudging her gently when her excitement threatened to tip over her food bowl. The transformation in all their lives had been remarkable. Martha, who had seemed lost in grief 6 months ago, now moved through her days with renewed purpose. Caring for Hope had given her something to focus on beyond her loss, while Rex's presence provided a living connection to her son that brought comfort rather than pain. Sarah Mitchell arrived for their weekly coffee visit just as Martha was hanging up her dish towel. Through the kitchen window, they could see Hope and Rex playing in the backyard, the puppy's golden coat brilliant against the green Colorado grass as she chased Rex's patient form around the old oak tree that Michael had climbed as a boy. Look at them, Sarah said, settling into her familiar chair at Martha's kitchen table. Sometimes I think Hope believes Rex is her real father. In all the ways that matter, he is, Martha replied, pouring coffee into mugs that had become as much a part of their routine as thestories they shared. That dog's taught her everything. How to sit, how to stay, How to be brave when thunder rolls in. Michael would have loved watching them together. The kitchen walls bore testimony to Hopi's integration into the Harrison family. Photographs showed her growth from the tiny, fragile creature they'd rescued to the vibrant young dog she'd become. There was Hope's first day home from the clinic, dwarfed by Rex's massive frame. Hope learning to swim in Miller's Creek with Rex standing guard on the bank. Hope wearing a tiny police badge that Martha had ordered online, sitting proudly next to Rex in his official canine gear. "Any word from the film crew?" Sarah asked, stirring sugar into her coffee. Martha nodded, her expression mixing pride with gentle exasperation. "They'll be here next week to finish filming. Seems our stories touched more hearts than we ever imagined it would." The miracle at Cedar Falls Methodist Church had indeed captured national attention. The hashtag #RexKnew had been shared millions of times across social media platforms. Major news networks had covered the story. Dog rescue organizations had used it to promote animal adoption. And a documentary crew was now creating a full-length film about the bond between humans and animals. But for Martha, Sarah, and the residents of Cedar Falls, the real miracle wasn't the media attention. It was watching Hope grow into exactly the kind of dog Michael would have loved. She was gentle with children, protective of her family, and possessed an intelligence that reminded everyone who knew her of her unlikely salvation. Dr. Reynolds stopped by yesterday. Martha continued, settling into her chair. He says Hope's development is remarkable. No lasting effects from her trauma, perfect health, and a temperament that's just, she paused, searching for the right words. Like Michael's, Sarah finished. Protective but gentle, brave but thoughtful. Through the window, they watched. Rex teaching Hope an impromptu lesson in patience. The older dog had found a tennis ball and was demonstrating proper retrieval technique, approaching slowly, picking up gently, returning promptly. Hope watched with the intense concentration of a dedicated student, her head tilted in the way that always reminded Martha of Michael when he was learning something new. The doorbell's chime interrupted their coffee, and Martha opened the door to find Pastor Thompson standing on her porch with a warm smile and a covered dish. "Morning, Martha. Brought you some of Anna's famous cornbread," he said, handing over the plate. "Also wanted to discuss the dedication ceremony for next month." The Cedar Falls City Council had voted unanimously to dedicate the new municipal park to Michael's memory with a special monument honoring the bond between police officers and their canine partners. The dedication would take place on the first anniversary of Hope's rescue, and the entire town was planning to attend. Rex and Hope will be the guests of honor. Of course, Pastor Thompson continued, watching through the window as the two dogs engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation about proper stick-fetching protocol. The monument will feature both their stories. Rex as the hero who refused to give up, and Hope as the life that was saved through love and determination. Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears now, tears of gratitude rather than grief. "Michael would have been so proud," she said softly, "not of the monument or the attention, but of seeing how his last act of kindness created something beautiful." Sarah joined them at the door, and together they watched Hope attempt to copy Rex's retrieval demonstration. The puppy's technique was enthusiastic, if imperfect, but Rex's patient encouragement never wavered. When Hope successfully brought the ball back and dropped it at Rex's feet, the older dog's tail wagged with genuine pride. "That's love right there," Pastor Thompson observed. "Pure, unconditional love, the kind that sees potential instead of problems, possibilities instead of limitations." The truth of his words was evident in everything about Hope's development. Under Rex's guidance, she'd learn not just basic obedience, but deeper lessons about loyalty, courage, and compassion. When the neighbor's cat got stuck in a tree, Hope had barked alertingly until humans came to help. When a little girl fell off her bicycle in front of Martha's house, Hope had gently licked away tears while Rex stood guard until child's parents arrived. Speaking of love, Sarah said with a grin, "Did you tell Pastor Thompson about Hope's latest accomplishment?" Martha's eyes sparkled with grandmotherly pride. "Show him Hope," she called Dot at the sound of her name. Hope bounded toward the house with Rex trotting alongside. When they reached the porch, Martha held up her hand in the universal stay gesture. Both dogs immediately sat, but Hope added her own special touch. She placed her small paw over Rex's massive one, a gesture she'd developed entirely on her own. "I'll be blessed," Pastor Thompson breathed. "It's like she understands they're a team." "More than a team," Martha corrected gently. "They're family. The kind of family that transcends biology and circumstances, held together by something stronger. Famblood." As if to prove her point, Rex leaned down to nuzzle Hope's golden head, and the puppy responded by pressing closer to his protective warmth. It was the same gesture they'd shared that first day in Doc Reynolds' clinic, now refined by months of growing trust and deepening bond. Sarah checked her watch and reluctantly stood to leave. "I promised the documentary crew I'd review their final script today. They want to make sure they captured the real story, not just the sensational parts." "The real story," Martha repeated thoughtfully, "is that love finds a way, always finds a way. Michael saved Hope. Rex saved them both. And now they're saving me by giving me purpose and joy I thought I'd lost forever." As Sarah's car disappeared down the tree-lined street, Martha settled onto her porch swing with a fresh cup of coffee. Rex immediately positioned himself at her feet while Hope curled up in the patch of sunlight beside them, her golden fur warming in the Colorado sunshine. The town of Cedar Falls continued its daily rhythm around them. School buses carrying children to morning classes, postal workers delivering mail, neighbors heading off to jobs that kept their small community running. But here on Martha Harrison's porch, time moved differently.